Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of heebie-jeebies TV. This is where true crime meets the other side. And in today's episode, we are going to visit the other side and we are going to talk about paranormal 911 calls. Now, this could be about 911 dispatchers, police officers, fire department, medical officers, or paramedics. And the reason I want to focus on this today is because I find these stories to be very eerie, not just from the perspective of what happened to them, but because these people, based on the work that they do on a regular basis, these people are more inclined to have a very objective and non-religious perspective to what is going on around them. They are the type of people that are very no nonsense, straightforward, and they will try to use reason to explain anything odd that happens or something that is unexplainable. Whereas most people would kind of be like, oh my God, there's a ghost, if you know what I mean. So whenever these sorts of people come forward with a spooky story, I am much more inclined to believe them. All right, so let's get into today's spooky stories. And if you guys have any of your own spooky stories, leave them in the comments below. I would love to read them. Or if you have any suggestions for a future video like this on what sorts of spooky stories you want to hear, drop a comment. All right, let's get into the stories. My uncle was the sheriff of a small town in New Mexico. He was the most hardcore person in our family, super straight-laced, never really BS'd, and wasn't a joker at all. So when he told the story, backed up by my aunt, we all believed it without question. A local reporter named Bob D would always show up at any major police activity, from the police scanner. Big car wrecks, fires, anything worth maybe reporting in the local paper. Everybody on the force knew Bob D. He was around at least once or twice a week at various police activities. Bob was a bit of a joker himself. He would mess with people by flicking behind their ears. People would react to the flicks thinking it was a bug, only to turn around and see it was Bob jerking around. Everybody liked Bob. Unfortunately, Bob had bad lung cancer and died pretty suddenly. His wife buried him against his wishes because he wanted to be cremated. For the next couple of weeks after his funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at car wrecks, fires, all the same stuff he used to report on. There were 20, 30 reports like this from civilians and members of the force, but my uncle didn't buy it. Until that night, he and my aunt showed up at our house, gun drawn, pale as paper. We asked him what the hell happened, and he had to sit down, take his breath, compose himself, and start to outline what happened. Note, this is a guy that I never saw get rattled by anything. He said him and my aunt were sitting on the couch in their house watching TV. My uncle kept scratching at his ear over and over. Finally, my aunt asked him what the problem was, and he turned around just in time to see their bedroom door open. Bob D was standing right there in the doorway, and it was clear as day. My uncle jumped up, cussed or something, and got my aunt's attention, who turned around to see him there too. As soon as they both made eye contact with him, Bob smiled, turned, walked across the living room and out their front door, and closed the door behind himself, and then he was gone. My uncle got control of himself and ran outside, gun drawn, looking for Bob, but he was gone. At that point, they ran over to our place. We went over there and didn't see anything, but my aunt and uncle stayed at our place that night. At work the next day, all the guys on the force were giving my uncle lots of "we told you so." People around town said they saw Bob D show up at police scenes for at least another 2 or 3 months. My dad also saw him in our dark room in our basement with a friend. He was flicking their ears in the dark. During the 3rd month people saw him, they kept saying that he was looking worse and worse. My uncle saw him 2 more times, each time confirming he was looking more and more worn. My dad had concluded that he was decomposing, and his ghost was reflecting that process. Every time my ear itches now, I get goosebumps. worked as a police officer in a small town in rural Nebraska. Back in the 90s, I was patrolling through the town in the winter. We had several abandoned houses in town, but one seemed to have the attraction of copper thieves, so we were told to keep an eye on it. I drove by it around 7 p.m. Since it sat on a corner lot, I had a clear view of all four sides of the house. As I drove around the corner, nothing looked out of the ordinary. About 2 hours later, I drive by again, and the back door is wide open. I know that the back door was not open when I drove by it earlier. Looking at the snow on the ground around the house, there were no footprints. So I think, what the hell? I call dispatch, tell them I'm investigating an open door at that address, and ask for a county sheriff to start my way. I walk to the open door, pull out my flashlight, and shine it inside. The house has obviously been gutted for the most part. The plaster walls have been torn down, debris piles everywhere since there were no footprints in the snow around the door other than mine. And with all the dust on the floor not showing any footprints, I chalk it up to the wind, or maybe the door just opened on its own. I was about to secure the door when I heard a loud thump come from upstairs and what sounded like kids laughing. So I enter the house and yell out, "Police department, come downstairs." I tell dispatch that it sounds like there are kids in the house and start making my way through the kitchen into the living room where the stairs are, all the while cautiously checking the main floor. 2 more times I hear something upstairs, but since I've had no response, I start thinking maybe it's an animal. Still, I hear what I swear were kids laughing. I head upstairs and it gets quiet. The upstairs is relatively small with the hallway at the top of the stairs that has one bedroom on the right, one straight ahead at the end of the hall, and a bedroom on the left. As I get to the top of the stairs, I hear a thump in the bedroom to the left. I carefully peek around the door, and it's an empty room with a small pile of plaster and wood debris in the middle. No kidding, sitting on top of the pile of debris was a page torn out of a child's book with a picture of a police officer on it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got out of that room quickly, cleared the other rooms upstairs, and got the F out of there. I told dispatch nobody was in the house, locked the back door, and never went back there again. I got called to a residence out in the boonies. This was in Wyoming, so the boonies are really the boonies, at about 11 p.m. for suspicious activity. When we get there, we are told by the family living there that there are very strange screams coming from a creek area about 1,000 feet out. And sure enough, while waiting outside on the porch with them for about a minute, I hear it. It is very hard to describe what it sounded like. It was like a woman in very severe distress, but higher pitched, and each scream lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds. It never sounded like it was saying anything. It just sounded like a cry of sheer terror, and it repeated again. We tell the family we are going to investigate. So we just walked down to the creek since it was nice out. We hear about 2 more screams, getting louder and louder as we approach the creek. By now, we're both kind of freaked out. There are 2 possibilities. Either someone is getting murdered or it's a wild animal. As we approach the creek bed, we hear no screams for about 5 minutes. We search around and find nothing, yelling at the top of our lungs for somebody to come towards us if they are there. Then we hear the exact same scream behind us, exactly from where we came from. We get about halfway back to the house and the scream comes so loudly it seems to be right next to us. We frantically shine our flashlights everywhere and find nothing. No eye glints of animals, no rustling of the bushes, just silence. We trace our steps back and the scream comes from around the creek again. This time it lasted about 30 seconds and was much louder than before. Our retreat becomes a little bit more hastened. By this time we were both scared shitless and verified with the family to call us again if they heard it. They never called us again though, and we got the hell out of there. I still don't know what it was. As an avid outdoorsman, I know no animal makes a cry like that, especially one that can move stealthily without being spotted by flashlights. Something else that weirded me out was that it was completely silent while the screams were happening. During summer in Wyoming, there's always some type of ambient animal sounds, frogs croaking, crickets chirping, owls hooting, coyotes howling, etc. But there was nothing. Until we were leaving and the screams had stopped, then a frog started croaking. It gives me the creeps just thinking about it. At our department, we had fairly strict policies regarding how we handle 911 calls that were either missed dials or dead air. We always sent 2 officers out to the address to ascertain why and how the calls were made. Our state had a database of this information and put out statistics every year on this information. Additionally, it was fairly useful deterrent against the kids who loved prank calling and the old folks who called dispatch just to have someone to talk to. Like I stated before, we were a fairly small county. This particular case involved some fairly strange 911 calls in a newer subdivision of our county. Shortly after I began working as a deputy in early 2001, real estate developers began to build expensive housing in a newly cut subdivision that ran against one of the larger creeks in our county. Seemingly overnight, a huge wooded area turned into 800,000 plus housing. At night, myself and another deputy would go on foot patrol through the new subdivision. It was a way to kill time on slow nights and another way to fulfill our curiosity about how big these houses really were. However, there was one larger Victorian-style 2-story house that overlooked the river that we typically did a quick patrol through and got the hell out of there. I could never put my finger on it, but I always had this feeling of uneasiness when we walked on the property and through the home as it was under construction. The other deputy, a good friend of mine, always told me the shadows were watching him when we walked through that house. We jokingly called the house Marilyn Manson's crib. We never felt weird in any other location in the subdivision. Months passed, and most of the subdivision was completed by early summer. People began to move in, and all shifts at the sheriff's department began to patrol the area. However, the house I felt strange in had seemingly came to a construction standstill. From talking to the general contractor, the real estate company had 3 potential buyers for the home, but they all backed out for various reasons. Now, this was not uncommon due to high prices and uncertainty over property taxes, but something in my mind just didn't add up. After speaking to some of the subcontractors involved, it seemed like the potential buyers toured the property and noped out of the deal as quick as possible. Around December 2001, a buyer was finally found for the house, but the closing had to be delayed to finalize some utility issues in the area. About 2 weeks before the new owners closed on the home, our dispatch received a 911 call from the home with dead air. I was on shift that night and took lead while another deputy headed my way. I went over to our secondary radio channel and began asking a ton of questions to our dispatcher about the nature of the call. All she could advise was that she was getting dead air and the callback number was showing all 6s, and the address was showing to be the creepy house in the new subdivision. I found this quite odd as the general contractor sent our department the house numbering for this particular street a couple days before the call. I figured our dispatch supervisor had updated our 911 system to reflect these new addresses. When I rolled up to the house was completely dark. I stayed in my patrol vehicle and hit the house with my spotlight while I waited for backup to arrive. Nothing was found out of the ordinary and no signs of vandalism were discovered. However, the entire time I was there, I felt a heaviness that I could only describe as someone pushing down on my shoulders and weighing me down. We closed the call out as unfounded. After we cleared, I let our patrol sergeant know what was going on. He felt that it was an error with the 911 system and stated we need to inform the day shift dispatch supervisor. The next morning, I notified our dispatch supervisor about the error and was met with a perplexed look. She proceeded to tell me that this was impossible because the utility company had not ran phone service to any of the houses in that part of the subdivision yet. Apparently, this was the utility issue that was preventing closing for the homeowners. She stated that she was waiting until the end of the week to update the 911 system to reflect the new addresses, as it would be a waste of time to load in new addresses with no telephone service. Thus, the address could not have appeared on our computer-aided dispatch system. I believed our dispatch supervisor on her assessment. She had been with the county for 10 plus years, seen the 911 system designed and implemented, and generally did a very good job. So I took her at her word, which unsettled me even more. Determined to get to the bottom of the issue, I passed this issue on to the day sergeant and asked if one of the deputies could follow up with the phone company if they were out working near that house. Later that evening, I found a note in my patrol box that stated, Phone company is working on the lines across the street from 12345 street name. I won't be working on that address until later this week. Phone company doesn't know what's causing 911 issue. Maybe dispatch got the address wrong. That night, dispatch received another 911 call with dead air for the same house. Once again, we responded and nothing was found out of the ordinary. The deputy that responded with me that night told me afterward that he felt like he was being watched the entire time we checked the perimeter of the home. I still felt the heaviness when walking around the house. The next morning, the patrol sergeant and I both spoke with dispatch supervisor and basically told her the impossible was occurring and we needed to get to the bottom of it. She pulled the records from the night before, and sure enough, the impossible address was being sent from some unknown phone lines to our 911 system, which propagated out to the dispatch operator's CAD in our in-car computers. By that evening, we all received an email from the dispatch supervisor stating that she had no idea how this was happening and believed it to be a glitch that she corrected in the 911 system. However, she added the new addresses anyway since the phone company was almost done working in the area. Basically, she had no damn clue what was causing the problem. We started getting nightly 911 calls to that house. Our patrol sergeant finally told dispatch we wouldn't be responding until the buyers moved in. In some weird way, this made me feel much better. I absolutely hated responding to that house. The next week, on one of my nights off, I heard on my radio that the patrol sergeant on the differential shift told two deputies to get to the bottom of what was going on at that house. Apparently, he believed that kids were somehow tampering with the phone system and just trying to waste the county's time. Bored and somewhat curious, I called the patrol sergeant on his cell phone and asked if the 911 call came in with dead air like it had for us multiple times. He said this particular call was downright creepy. He stated dispatch answered the call, and it sounded like someone either was gagged or the phone was completely muffled. Apparently, the person on the other end of the line sounded like they were in distress and sounded like they were talking at a rapid pace. Now, at this point, the new owners still had not moved into the house, and as far as I know, had not connected the phone service. Like all other times before, the deputies got on scene, checked the perimeter, and looked through the house to the best of their abilities and found nothing. However, one of them mentioned feeling unusually cold when walking near the back of the property. I talked with him later, as this was fairly strange since he was the only one who felt it, and our average temperature at night in December hovers a little about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The deputy who reported the coldness was directed by the sergeant to the park in front of the house for a couple of hours to look out for anything suspicious. Apparently, the deputy lasted another hour and a half before throwing up about 6 or 7 times on the side of the road and took off for the evening. I talked with him about this experience a couple days later, and he stated he felt fine after he left the area. However, he said the longer he was near the house, the sicker he felt. Anecdotal at best, but it still creeped me out. A few weeks passed, and the new homeowners, husband, wife, and 2 kids moved in. Stayed less than 3 months and put the home on the market at a fairly substantial loss. We received numerous 911 calls from the homeowners ranging from prowlers in the area to break-ins with the suspect still in the residence. Now the calls were coming from the alarm company instead of the homeowners themselves. Apparently they installed a fairly high-end security system with motion sensors that called the security company after the owners armed the system in the master bedroom before going to sleep. 8 out of 10 calls we received were for motion sensor activation alarms. I probably responded a total of 20 times in 3 months to that house. I think the alarm company was out there almost as many times, but they could never find a defect in the system. The owner, the husband, was continuously traveling for business, leaving his wife and kids home for the better part of the 3 months they lived there. The wife was absolutely convinced the house was haunted. Now, based on the contact I had with the wife, I tended to believe her. She was well educated, very articulate, and her description of the shadows moving scared the hell out of me, as that was eerily similar to what my friend encountered. In fact, my deputy friend, who often responded to the calls with me, made it known to the wife that he saw something similar before the house's construction was complete. I still jokingly blame him for costing that family a ton of money after they got the hell out of there. Before the family moved, we encouraged them to get with their alarm company and install cameras that activated with the alarm system to see if they could get to the bottom as to what was causing the motion sensors to activate and call the alarm company. However, they never did. I think the wife's persistence got to the husband, and he sold the house just to get her to stop talking about it. During the last month they were there, our sheriff felt it necessary to send an off-duty deputy to sit outside the residence on more than 3 occasions, just to ease the mind of the wife. Each time, a different deputy was sent. All of them reported feeling strange while on assignment, but no one reported seeing anything suspicious. Since the first family left, that house was owned by at least 12 different families since 2002. We kept getting 911 calls that were either from the alarm company and or dead air for as long as I worked at the department. Most owners didn't stay more than a year and a half. I think most of them stayed there just long enough to sell the house at a reasonable price to the next poor, unsuspecting buyer. I particularly felt bad for the family who got stuck with the housing crisis of '08 and '09. I can't stress how strange this is, as a majority of the original owners in the subdivision continue to live there, and we rarely get calls to any other house in the subdivision. I could probably write a book about that house based on the 9 years I worked at the department. I am a police officer working on an emergency response team on a busy London borough. We took a call to a suspected domestic incident in a block of flats. The informant said that she could hear screaming and the sounds of disturbance coming from the flat above her own. Once we arrived, my colleague and I knocked on the door of the flat the informant said the noise was coming from. I had heard nothing on my way up and certainly couldn't hear any disturbance coming from the address. To be honest, I heard nothing at all. After knocking twice, we had no response. My colleague left me to go downstairs and speak directly to the informant. I stayed by the door. I knocked again, and after some time, it was answered by an elderly woman. She had clearly been asleep and was alarmed to see me standing outside. I told her that someone had called saying that they could hear a disturbance coming from within her address. I asked her if there was anyone else inside with her. She looked bemused and told me that she lived alone and had been sleeping. I asked her if I could come in to satisfy myself and that no one else was there. She invited me in, and I walked into what was a 2 small-bedroom flat. The flat was in darkness apart from her hall and her bedside lamp. I began searching through the flat. As I approached the final door, the living room, my colleague called me on the radio. He told me that he was on his way and asked if I was okay. I told him everything was fine, wondering why he sounded so flustered. He told me that he was with the informant and could also hear screaming and loud thuds coming from the flat I was in. I told him that he must be mistaken, as I was almost done searching the flat and that I heard nothing whatsoever. I have to admit a feeling of unease as I opened the final door. Like all the other rooms, it was in darkness but freezing cold. My breath misted immediately. There was no one in the room, no signs of a disturbance. No windows were open either. I called my colleague and asked him to listen for my footfall. He said he could hear my feet as I stamped them, but said that the screaming had stopped. This coincided with me opening the door. I left shortly after, apologizing to the elderly woman for waking her. I have no rational explanation for this at all. My colleague and I left feeling very creeped out. I was a Met police officer serving with the Diplomatic Protection Group during the '80s. I was on night duty on protection of a government building in Carlton House Terrace in central London. It was the early hours of the morning, and I decided to take a walk around the outside perimeter to check that as well. I opened the front door to see a young boy standing about 12 feet away from me. He was wearing an Edwardian tweed cap, jacket, plus 4 trousers and long socks. He was also carrying a heavy old-style leather football. Where this property is used a great deal for filming, as it is very atmospheric. Think Sherlock Holmes. I said, "Hello, what are you doing here?" He smiled and bounced the ball. I realized that the ball made no sound upon striking the ground. I then saw standing behind him was a lady, late 30s, wearing a small straw hat with flowers and cherries on it. She was wearing a long cream cotton dress, Edwardian style, with leg of mutton sleeves. She beckoned to the boy with her hand to come to her. He smiled at me and waved and joined the woman. They turned away from me and vanished. I know I was not dreaming. I requested a signal check on my radio to my control. Perhaps I had experienced some sort of time slip. Military policemen in the Marine Corps here. While stationed at Camp Lejeune, a dispatcher got a call from a terrified wife that kids were trying to get into her house. It was a little after midnight. We thought it was just a drunken spouse call and responded not on high alert, just kind of wanted to make sure the lady was all right. We knock on the door and announce ourselves. The woman is obviously shaken, still with puffy eyes. She tells us 4 children with red eyes rang her doorbell and asked to come inside, and when she refused, they got angry. The kids terrorized her for the 5 minutes. Her own child was put to bed and her husband was deployed. I decided to do a once-over of the whole housing property, and it was a whole lot of nothing going on. My partner and I decided to do a little walking patrol of that housing area. In each housing area, there's usually a decent-sized playground. As we were walking up to it, we both see some kids swinging. Curfew is 8 p.m. for young children unless accompanied by an adult on base. I'm fucking spooked at this point, and I know my partner is too. They look over at us and just stare. We started backtracking and then turned and didn't look back and didn't talk about it the rest of the night either. Later, I looked up the incident online since Lejeune is famous for a lot of paranormal activity, and it turns out the little red-eyed kids had been reported there before.